I think that we do live in a world where a lot of technology is converging, and unfortunately absolute security is absolutely impossible. So this has definitely been a wake-up call. There will be some repercussions from it, and it's quite interesting to look at the anatomy of this, I suppose.
You say that having absolute security is virtually not possible in this current environment. Why are we so vulnerable, though? I mean, why is the West so vulnerable to this kind of hacking?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's probably a couple of reasons. These things generally fall into people, process and technology. I think if you were to rewind a couple of 100 years and you would interact with your diplomats, it was a very strategic discussion you would have, and you'd say, over the next 3 years of your posting to wherever, these are what I'd like to achieve. They would execute that tactically. I think we live in a communication age now where you can reach out and micromanage to some extent people, and there's a lot of communications from Twitter down to cables, etc. What's quite interesting, if you look at diplomatic cables, and that definitely represents the high watermark of the kind of things you need to protect. They are multi-layered, there's different classifications for each of the systems, but they still have vulnerabilities around the infrastructure, they still have vulnerabilities around the people and the process around those things.
Do you think it's because, I suppose, governments and bureaucracies are just slower in their understanding of how to protect their systems? You know, we often see these kinds of hackings take place, sometimes to companies, you know, twice in the space of a few months. And you think, how can this happen? Why didn't they safeguard themselves the first time round?
Well, it's a good question. There's a couple of dimensions to it. I think in the commercial world you see the impact of that quite quickly, because you've got to think that the hacker is trying to monetize the value of the thing they've stolen. So if it was a credential, perhaps they'll try and sell it on the dark web for money. I think when it comes to diplomatic cables, and this happened, 3 years ago, and it's just surfaced now, I think hackers employ a fantastic weapon called patience, and they sit and they collect the things they need to collect. They're not seeking to monetize that, but it's extremely valuable information. I think governments are aware of the sensitivities, but it is a trade-off. You could have the most secure system that doesn't enable you to freely facilitate information, and that could be rendered useless. Or you can have a very open system that's quite vulnerable. So I think the challenge is, particularly as more and more of the infrastructure becomes what they call software-defined data centers, software-defined networks, it does expose the attack surface of vectors into an organisation, and that requires a different response for security. There is definitely a catch-up going on as people realise how to really harness the benefit of that while managing the risk, what Accenture calls growing confidently.
China has maintained that these accusations are baseless. We just spoke to a China analyst from Beijing who said, actually, this is about China's economy. The United States is afraid that we will bypass them on technology, on cyber, with our economy, and therefore they are now looking for loopholes, looking for excuses to come after us.
I mean, I can't comment on the attribution of the current attack. The US security officials can form their own conclusions. I think that we do live in a world where people want to be able to get some advantage, and states and other actors will chase any advantage they can get. If you look at diplomatic cables, the sort of information that's contained within them could enhance trade negotiations, they could severely affect the economic policy of a country, or, as I suspect the case is in this particular situation, they will be quite embarrassing because they generally might contain opinions that diplomats might have on their counterparts that could be embarrassing.
When we say they were Russian hackers or Chinese hackers, how do we know for sure? I mean, do they leave their fingerprints all over something?
Look, that question of attribution is very, very difficult, and I can't comment on this, I don't have enough insight. There are certain things that mark when people have done those things. People much smarter than I probably can figure those things out, but I guess it does underpin the central problem. It's very hard to attribute that. So if you take a situation where the prize is enormous, the chance of getting caught is slim, and the attribution of being caught to you is almost zero, those things are going to be likely to happen.